Hi everyone, Coltony Snowtano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Panopticon album, The Rime of Memory. This is a brand new LP from American black metal project Panopticon, masterminded by vocalist, multi-instrumentalist, and songwriter Austen. For years I've been on a bit of a pendulum swing when it's come to Panopticon's output. It was Austen's earliest attempts at fusing the harsh and sometimes romantic sounds of black metal with Western folk music that caught my attention first, but maybe came across a bit too messy performance and production-wise to fully get on board with. However, Panopticon would go on to nail it with tighter instrumentation, better performances on subsequent records like Autumn Eternal and Roads to the North. This is where Panopticon would really develop its trademark sound, but this defining character almost became something to run away from or an expectation to break, as Austen would eventually go on to release the 2018 album The Scars of Man on the Once Nameless Wilderness, a two-disc experience where the folk elements and the metal elements were separated into their own sections of the album. And the end result, in my opinion, was kind of generic explorations of each sound. However, these worlds would fuse together once again on the Epic and Triumphant and again Into the Light. This record may have not been the most groundbreaking for Panopticon per se, but it still felt good to hear another well-written, well-produced, heavy, kind of rustic album. Fast forward to today, though, where we have the latest Panopticon excursion, The Rime of Memory, which is a very personal and conceptual album for Austen. Here you'll find lamentations about the slow and callous destruction of our planet and its ecosystem, as a connection to the spiritual and the natural has always been pretty essential to Panopticon's music. But this is also very much a record about aging, reaching different key points and milestones in life, and also coming to grips with your own mortality. But most importantly, this album does also bring a pretty pronounced shift in sound for the project, as this album isn't nearly as folky as the most definitive Panopticon albums so far. Aesthetically, it's more traditional black metal than anything, and leans pretty heavily into those brittle guitars, into the harsh wintry atmospheres, the blast beat drums. And for sure, there are passages on this record where some acoustic guitar may take over or some elegantly layered strings, but this record is far from bringing the rustic vibes that Panopticon is typically known for, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because this time around Austen is clearly going for something different, as The Rime of Memory is very much more about heaviness, grandiosity, creating this monolithic sound, and the result is certainly the most gargantuan Panopticon album so far. There's a lot of personnel thanked in the liner notes of this LP, and you really do hear it, especially during some of the final moments of Winter's Ghost, where you're getting hit with the drums and the guitars and the bells, the strings, the group chorus vocals. And one more thing that is massive about this record, the song lengths. Now, it's not a super long album overall, just 75 minutes or so, which is not a punishing runtime, but the track list is built out of really 5 core songs that span anywhere from 9 to about 20 minutes. And it is an undertaking for sure for Austen to have his eggs divvied up between so few baskets, because on occasion he does put a lot of runtime into a track that may have a passage or two that is not as gratifying and maybe kills the momentum or enjoyability a bit, like the 8-minute acoustic intro on Winter's Ghost does kind of drag, especially during this one moment where we are hit with a woodwind solo that doesn't sound quite in tune with all the instrumentation behind it. But I will say, once the electric guitars and drums do violently bust in, we do hear one of the most thrilling and aggressive performances on any Panopticon album ever. It's truly a roller coaster. Now, from here, the track Cedar Skeletons, as well as An Autumn Storm, do bring a bit of a lull to the progression of the record, with these tracks scaling it back a bit on the instrumentation and bringing a more standard black metal style. I am kind of missing a lot of those acoustic timbres and nuances, even if we are getting some epic harmonized guitar leads and solos in exchange. But the most perplexing thing on these tracks are the passages of spoken word that are mentioned in the liner notes, but in practice add nothing to the experience of the music itself, mostly because they're barely audible to begin with, and the first one that pops up randomly sounds like the audio from a YouTube how-to video or a news report, which it may in fact be, as the song's lyrics do seem to be about lifeless cedar trees and a dying ecosystem and forest. But it still interrupts the flow of the song more than anything, and again, isn't even legible, so whatever message it's trying to get across, I don't even fully know. Weirdly, the spoken word passage that pops up later in the same track over much more mellow guitars isn't really all that audible either. And yeah, this is kind of my same issue with An Autumn Storm, even if I am enjoying the more wintry, atmospheric, and synthy mix on this track. Thankfully, Enduring the Snow Drought doesn't really have any of this filler in it, and brings some of the most righteous and triumphant layers on the entire LP. Also the most gratifying progressions too on the record, as it's amazing to hear the track evolve from these epic, soaring guitar leads, massive blast beats, to eventually growing into this jam in 7/8 time that gradually builds into another peak of deafening black metal, with some incredible drum fills throughout. Meanwhile, the closing track, The Blue Against the White, is a pretty strong closer for this project, a very big project, thankfully. There are some touching, dreamy guitars and cleanly sung vocals on the front end that eventually give way to these very dramatic, weeping strings, just bleeding over these glaciers of black metal instrumentation below. There's a shimmering post-rock or post-metal-esque bridge on the track too, and Austen does a great job at the very end of bringing a lot of the instrumentation back and really hammering the listener on the outro. Overall, I really enjoyed this album, even if I thought that it had a couple of very obvious shortcomings. Those midpoint tracks with these spoken word passages weren't quite working, not to mention that many of the major compositional progressions throughout these tracks could have most likely been hit with slightly shorter runtimes, maybe several minutes shorter, that would have undoubtedly made for a more engaging listen, as I don't think many of the builds needed to be quite that gradual. If the tracks here were going to be this long, there could have been maybe a bit more variation. Still, the performances on this thing are tight. The melodies, the chords, the vocal performances are varied, are impassioned, are fiery, are hellish, but also sometimes beautiful. And I will say one more time, this is handily the biggest and most grand and most crushing Panopticon record so far, but it's also one of the more bloated albums in the project's catalog, which is why, even if I did enjoy it, I'm not loving it quite as much as the last record, or at least a few to precede it. Feeling a decent 2 strong 7 on this one. Transition, have you given this record a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Panopticon, forever.